Hello and welcome to The Top Story, a podcast with the headlines of the day from our correspondents around the world. I'm Xizhi. Coming up in this edition, US President Joe Biden has called on Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu to negotiate a ceasefire in Gaza and ensure the release of the remaining hostages. Minnesota Governor Tim Walz has officially accepted the US Democratic Party's nomination for vice president. And the World Health Organization has appealed to European governments to unite with Africa in a fight to eradicate the mpox virus. We begin on the Middle East. US President Joe Biden and Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu had a phone call on Wednesday, hours after US Secretary of State Antony Blinken ended his Middle East visit with a ceasefire deal still in doubt. Biden urged the Israeli leader to reach a Gaza ceasefire deal and secure the release of remaining hostages. Mediators from Egypt, Qatar and the United States have pinned their hopes on the U.S. proposal to bridge the gaps between Israel and Hamas, despite criticism from both warring sides. Yasser Hakim has more from Cairo.
What started off as a visit that had shown some optimism has ended with more complications. There are outstanding issues on multiple. First of all, issues like the presence of Gaza, of Hamas in Gaza, and the presence of Israeli forces in Gaza after the ceasefire. Each side wants the other not to be available in Gaza at all. Israel does not want Hamas to be in Gaza, while Hamas says Israeli forces have to leave Gaza after a ceasefire. The ceasefire itself is an issue. Hamas wants a complete permanent ceasefire and prisoner swap. Israel says it will continue until Hamas is totally destroyed, and therefore it only wants a temporary ceasefire and a prisoner swap. The prisoner swap now is even in contention because of the differences over names and numbers of prisoners and hostages to be released according to a schedule. So Antony Blinken came in with what he called a bridging proposal, and he left with still unable to reach an agreement, and talks in Cairo might help to forge out some kind of bridging or these differences and try to reach some kind of an agreement, especially that we also have the issue of the Philadelphia corridor, in which the Israeli Prime Minister has insisted that Israeli forces will stay at the Philadelphia corridor, which is a corridor along the Egyptian-Gaza borders known as the Rafah border crossing.
That was Yasser Hakim reporting from Cairo. Tensions between Israel and Lebanon's Hezbollah are simmering as both sides continue to exchange fire. The Israeli military said it bombed Hezbollah weapons storage facilities in Lebanon overnight. Hezbollah said it retaliated with a drone attack on military posts in northern Israel. Jonathan Regev reports from Tel Aviv.
There was a very violent morning in the northern border, and not the areas which are usually targeted, not the Upper Galilee as it is known here, which is targeted, not the communities or the military bases which are close to the border, but rather towns and communities which are on the Golan Heights on the eastern part of northern Israel. They were severely targeted with a large attack coming from drones, from rockets fired into this area. Israel claims that Hezbollah deliberately is targeting civilians. If in the past these strikes, usually Hezbollah would say that the drones and the rockets were fired towards military installations, Israel says that the attack this time deliberately was aimed at a civilian community, and that Israel would act in accordance to that. Of course, when it comes to Hezbollah, they claim that this comes to two Israeli attacks in the past 2 nights, both of them coming deep inside Lebanon, an area known in Lebanon known as the Baqa area, some 50-60 miles north of the Israeli border. Israel claims that it hit huge military depots, ammunition depots deep inside Lebanon, and Hezbollah said that the attack this morning was in retaliation to that. An interesting comment came from Yoav Gallant, the Minister of Defense, who said regarding those attacks in the Baqa area in Lebanon that Israel is preparing for the option of a larger scale war, and therefore is targeting ammunition depots by Hezbollah in order to be ready. So, both sides are saying that they're waiting to see what happens with the negotiations regarding Israel and Hamas. But as this happens, the northern arena is active and violent as ever.
That was Jonathan Regev on the simmering tensions between Israel and Hezbollah. In Europe, Ukraine has said it is using US-made weapons to destroy pontoon bridges in Russia's Kursk region. Since it began the cross-border assault into Kursk on August 6th, Kyiv has claimed a series of battlefield successes. Megumi Lim reports from Kyiv.
Ukrainian forces are continuing to advance in Russia's Kursk region, although the pace has somewhat slowed. But it looks like so far Russian reinforcements there has failed to stop Kyiv's advances. Now, Ukraine's commander-in-chief Alexander Syrsky said his forces has captured an additional 28 to 35 kilometers of territory there and are pushing deeper into the Kursk region. And he said that his forces now control a total of 93 settlements. Now, analysts are saying that Ukraine still needs to control or capture a few more settlements to be able to carve out a buffer zone for Ukraine's Sumy region and to achieve its objectives of protecting the Sumy region from future Russian bombardments and also future potential Russian ground offensives.
That was Megumi Lim in Kyiv. In the United States, Minnesota Governor Tim Walz has formally accepted the Democratic Party's vice presidential nomination. This was the highlight of Day 3 of the Democratic National Convention in Chicago. Former President Bill Clinton and the top Democrats took to the stage to argue that Kamala Harris-Tim Walz ticket is in the best interest of Americans. Philip Crowther has more.
Well, it was former President Bill Clinton who 23 years after leaving the White House left the stage here at the United Center in Chicago just a short while ago. That makes it 3 former and current presidents who have now addressed this Democratic National Convention. Barack Obama, the former president, of course, last night to a rapturous applause and a rapturous welcome from Democratic Party delegates. And of course, it was current President Joe Biden who gave one of his political farewell speeches here on the first night. Bill Clinton makes that 3 of them now who have put their support firmly behind Kamala Harris. And from Bill Clinton, this was also a tribute to the current President Joe Biden, saying that he has enhanced his legacy by deciding to leave the race for the White House early. That's some of what Bill Clinton said here today, but he also criticized the former President Donald Trump, of course the nominee for the Republican Party, saying that the only people he fights for are, quote, me, myself, and I.
2 days ago, I turned 78, the oldest man in my family of 4 generations. And the only personal vanity I want to assert is I'm still younger than Donald Trump.
Bill Clinton, the former president, a prime-time speaker here on night 2 of the Democratic National Convention. Of course, he called on people to vote for Kamala Harris. That's not extraordinary, but it is a contrast to what happened at the Republican convention a month ago in Milwaukee, because that was largely about Donald Trump. A former president like George W. Bush, for example, did not put his support behind Donald Trump and did not speak at the Republicans' convention. Here, it is a show of force that all the leading lights of the Democratic Party very much are standing behind the current candidate, Kamala Harris. Bill Clinton, though, more of a warm-up act than anything really here tonight, because the keynote speaker is Tim Walz. He's the nominee for the vice presidency. He's the governor of Minnesota, and he is somebody who, according to recent polling, only 4 in 10 Americans know enough about to even have an opinion on him. That is, of course, supposed to change in a positive direction.
That is Philip Crowther on the U.S. Democratic National Convention. In Africa, Sudanese air forces have struck the Darfur region and central Sudan, targeting the paramilitary Rapid Support Forces. The attacks prompted the RSF to retaliate in other areas of Darfur, killing dozens of civilians. Naba Muhuddin reports.
The airstrikes mainly targeted the cities of Ad-Dain, At-Tuwaisha and Al-Fashir in Darfur, alongside Al-Hasahisa in Al-Jazeera state in central Sudan. Ad-Dain is the capital of eastern Darfur. It's one of the Rapid Support Forces' strongholds and has seen a resurgence of violence since the onset of war 16 months ago. At least 15 people were killed while dozens were injured at the main hospital. A displacement camp was also struck by the army attack. Activists and eyewitnesses reported destruction and civilian casualties. The Sudanese army has not commented on the latest airstrikes. In response, the RSF launched artillery strikes on civilian areas in Al-Fashir, the capital of North Darfur state, causing more deaths and injuries and complicating the humanitarian crisis in the region even further. The conflict in Sudan, which erupted in April 2023 between the army and the RSF, has killed thousands and displaced millions of people. The humanitarian situation is rapidly deteriorating despite the international community condemnation and calls for a ceasefire. The latest attacks on cities and civilians in many Sudanese states underscore the deteriorating security situation in the country and the urgent need to put an end to the conflict.
That was Naba Muhyiddin on the latest in Sudan. Finally, on global health, the World Health Organization has urged European governments to show solidarity with Africa in eliminating the mpox virus. Health authorities are rolling out much-needed vaccines across Africa, where the Democratic Republic of the Congo remains the epicenter of the outbreak. Jody Jacobs has more.
Following the World Health Organization declaring this latest wave of the mpox virus a global health emergency, the world has been on tenterhooks. However, the world body insists that the risk from mpox to the general populations outside of Africa is low. The WHO says mpox is not the new COVID.
We know what to do, and we need this time the political commitment to go for elimination. Otherwise, we'll always see neglect and then panic again. So let's have a political commitment to go the last mile and especially stand in solidarity with the African region.
In Africa, there's been more than 17,000 suspected or confirmed cases and a death toll of some 500 in at least 12 countries. The WHO says the epidemic had surpassed the scale of previous years. The UN Health Agency has now called specifically for European solidarity with Africa. It says equitable access to vaccines are needed. And while the European Union is already donating vaccines, the WHO says this generosity will be put to the test if more vaccines are needed in the EU.
We can and must tackle mpox together across regions and continents. So will we choose to put the systems in place to control and eliminate mpox globally, or we will enter another cycle of panic and then neglect?
Mpox is an illness caused by the monkeypox virus. Current scientific knowledge indicates that the disease is transmitted through skin-to-skin contact. The Democratic Republic of Congo and other African countries could start vaccinating against mpox within days, according to regional health authorities. The Africa Centers for Disease Control and Prevention says it's been working with countries on the logistics and communication strategies to roll out vaccine doses that are due to arrive soon. The European Union, the United States, Japan, and the vaccine maker Bavarian Nordic have all pledged consignments.
That was Jody Jacobs reporting. Now, recapping the headlines. US President Joe Biden has called on Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu to negotiate a ceasefire in Gaza and ensure the release of the remaining hostages. Minnesota Governor Tim Walz has officially accepted the US Democratic Party's nomination for vice president. And the World Health Organization has appealed to European governments to unite with Africa in a fight to eradicate the mpox virus. And that's it for this edition of The Top Story, a podcast that brings you world headlines every weekday. For more news in politics, business, sports and culture, you can subscribe to The Beijing Hour, a one-hour podcast news and magazine program. We welcome and appreciate all ratings and reviews. I'm Xi Zhi. Thank you for listening.